Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to go over the items that you will need to do this quilt along for 2025 by Lori Holt. She calls this the Flower Basket Quilt. All right, so this quilt finish is going to be 87.5 by 87.5. We're going to have pieced blocks and applique both, and sometimes both in the same block. All right, so let's get started. All right, everyone. So to get started on our quilt along, we need to go to the link I've provided for RileyBlakeDesigns.com so that you can print out your flower basket sampler sew along guide. It's 47 pages, all right? So in this quilt, we are going to be doing applique and piecing, and this is going to show us our cutting instructions and our layout and which sew simple shapes to use for each of our flower basket blocks. All right, so on this page, it's showing us the fabrics, what they look like, the amount of fabric you will need, and then how you will cut that fabric and how it will be used in your quilt. So let's look at the very first fabric. All right, it says Raindrop Sampler, Fat 1/8. So that tells us how much fabric we need of that color. It says cut 6 3 3/4 by 3 3/4 inch squares. Label 2 of them A for your piece block 2 and 2 of them for piece block 3 and 2 of them for piece block 10. Okay, so just to give you a heads up, the 3 3/4 inch squares that you're going to cut in this sew along guide are all going to be for our pinwheel blocks. Okay, so then it says cut 1 2.5 by 14 inch rectangle, and we are going to use that fabric for T6, which is what our Sew Simple shape. So each of our Sew Simple shapes have a number on them. So it'll say T6. You're going to pull that T out and you're going to use it for this fabric for block 9, and then you'll cut a 1 inch by 12.5 inch rectangle for also for block 9, and that is for the piecing part of the basket. So the T6 is actually going to be for an applique part. Okay, so whenever you see a T and then a number, that means that fabric is going to be used for a Sew Simple shape. So what I do is I go through and I highlight the T6, T15, T43, whatever Sew Simple shape is going to be used. And then I trace those shapes onto my heat and bond, and then I put it onto these fabric pieces that we cut out. All right? All right, so on this page, I'm showing you the shape, the Sew Simple shape. And you can see like the very first one is called T1. And it says we're going to need a piece of fabric that's 2.5 by 14 inches. And we're going to cut one of them. Okay, so I want you to make a note that on T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6, the shape is half the shape. So what you have to do is the provided shape that we buy when we buy the Sew Simple shapes is only half a piece. You're actually going to have to flip it over to have the other side. So you'll notice on the shape, it'll have a little mark that says center, and that'll be the center, and then you'll flip it over, and then you'll trace the other half. So the T1, 2.5 by 14, the Sew Simple shape is probably 7 inches. Okay. It's going to be half that because you're going to flip it and do it twice. And I'm going to show you when I trace this onto my heat and bond so that you can understand. So yes, so as you can see in our Sew Simple shapes sew along guide, it shows us each of the shapes, the number that's on the shape, and how many we need to cut of that shape. All right? All right, so some of the things you're going to need to do the applique part of the quilt. This is what I use. I use heat and bond paper, and Lori uses interfacing. She does her applique different than I do, so you can look at her website, beinmybonnet.blogspot, and see how she does the applique, but this is the way I do it. So I got the So Simple Shapes. I have a pen. I'm going to look at my guide and see what it says. So like on T9, it says I'm going to cut 2 of them. So I'm going to look for shape T9, and I'm going to trace that onto my heat and bond, the paper side, and then I will label it T9. We'll also need an iron for ironing our shapes onto the back of our fabric, and then we need scissors, of course, to cut it all out. All right, so on this page is how our applique basket block guide is. So we have 13 of these blocks, and this is block number 1. There's a page in the block guide for each block. So on here, it shows us the layout, how our block is going to be laid out. It's going to show us what to cut from our interfacing, because like I told you, Lori cuts her applique from interfacing. I do mine from heat and bond. Okay, then it says other materials required. These are things that she uses. And then on the bottom of the page is going to give us the cutting instructions for the pieced section of the block. So A through I are the pieced sections. So let's look at the block. So do you see where the handle is to the flower basket and the flowers, and then that ruffle brim? That's applique. Everything else on that block is pieced. So the first thing we're going to do is sew our block together, and then we will apply our applique after that. All right? All right, so the next part of our guide is our pinwheels. So this is block 1, and our pinwheels are all a pieced block. Okay, we're going to make 12 of these blocks. She has a page for each block. She's going to be telling you which fabrics you place where. You have A and D, and your A and D fabric is your 3 3/4 inch squares that we cut out already. Okay, then we will make it into 9 pinwheels, like a 9-pack, and then we have a small border to put on around it. And that's going to be B and C, which are our rectangles. All right, so we are going to take a light fabric and a dark and make our pinwheels, and we're going to do this for 12 blocks. After we make our blocks, we need to trim them to 15.5 inches. All right, guys. So in this picture, I'm showing you how I have already cut all of my fabrics for my 13 flower basket blocks. So I have the page for each block printed with the picture of the layout, and then each fabric, which size, and the applique pieces for the flower and the handle. Everything is included already in each bag, so now it's going to be really easy for me to go bag by bag and make each of my blocks. Now the pinwheel blocks, I did not put in bags like this. Lori has you make 12 pinwheel blocks. Okay, I'm not going to do it per page like she has. Block 1 is this fabric and this fabric together. What I did is I just cut all of my 3 3/4 inch squares out of the fabrics as the cutting instructions requested. But I made a stack of lights and a stack of darks, and I'm just going to randomly sew blocks together and make pinwheels. I'm not going to be picky about which fabric got paired with which fabric, but you can do that. She does have the instructions for all 12 of the blocks that have 9 pinwheels in each one, telling you which fabric to put with which background and then where it lays on the block. But I choose not to do that. I choose to just cut the fabrics as the guide has them, and then I'm just going to randomly pair them lights to darks. All of Lori's fabrics look great together. It really doesn't matter. All right, guys. So that pretty much covers everything you're going to need to start your quilt. Of course, you need a sewing machine, you'll need a ruler, and you will need a rotary cutter to cut your blocks out, your fabrics. All right, so we will add borders to the block once we put it all together, and then there is a pieced border and then a thick 5-inch border that goes around that. But don't forget, here's the link. I need you to go to the website. You can follow this link, type it in, or just go to RileyBlakesDesigns.com and go under the sew-alongs and find this quilt, which is called Flower Basket. Print out your guide and let's get started, guys, because let's get started on that first block. It's going to be very easy. I'm going to show you how to make the pieced section and then apply the applique to the top.
Like and subscribe to Grandma's channel. Like and subscribe to Grandma's channel.